Imagine the sound of a 2-ton stone being dragged over a limestone opening. Below it, in the absolute darkness of an 8-meter deep pit, the only audible sound is the heavy, guttural breathing of predators that haven't eaten in 4 days. For the Persian Empire, justice was not just a matter of laws, it was a choreography of biological terror. What popular culture often reduces to a story of biblical resilience, modern forensic archaeology is revealing as one of the most sophisticated and brutal execution methods of the ancient world. Recently, excavations at sites dating back 2,500 years have unearthed evidence that time tried to turn to dust. Fragments of human femurs and skulls bearing the unmistakable signature of a bite force exceeding 1,000 pounds per square inch. What archaeologists found in the depths of the ruins of Susa and Babylon were not simple prisons. They were specific engineering structures designed for the confinement of large animals and the systematic extermination of dissidents. Analyzing the soil of these ancient pits, the presence of high levels of organic phosphate confirms what ancient texts suggested. These locations were saturated with blood and carrion for decades. According to the records of Herodotus and cuneiform inscriptions from the period of Darius I, the use of Barbary lions, a subspecies now extinct in the wild that weighed over 270 kilograms, was a tool of political propaganda. The king did not just kill his enemies, he delivered them to the primal chaos of nature, erasing even the possibility of a dignified burial. Documentary science now compels us to look at the Book of Daniel, chapter 6, not just through the lens of faith, but as a historical crime scene report. The text describes a pit sealed with a royal ring, a bureaucratic measure to ensure that no one, not even the king himself, could interrupt the predation process. But the true archaeological revelation lies in the technical details of the feeding chambers. It was discovered that these pits possessed side tunnels and anterooms where the animals were instigated with spears and kept in a state of sensory deprivation and extreme hunger, transforming majestic beings into bone-crushing machines. Examining the stone reliefs of the Palace of Nineveh, now preserved in major international museums, we see the logistics behind this terror. Lions were captured in royal expeditions, transported in wooden cages reinforced with metal, and kept in urban pits so the population could hear their roars throughout the night. It was a constant reminder that the power of the empire was absolute and its hunger insatiable. The execution pit was the final point of any conspiracy, a place where political rhetoric ended and the brutal physics of nature took control. However, a discovery made by an archaeological mission in southern Iraq just under 9 years ago brought to light something experts considered impossible. In one of these pits, technically identified as execution deposits by beasts, the team found a set of human bones perfectly preserved in a layer of specific sediment. Unlike all other finds, where remains were scattered and chewed, this individual presented a disturbing skeletal integrity. There were no teeth marks. There were no signs of struggle. What stratigraphic analysis revealed about this specific location challenges biology and points to an event that historical science still cannot explain. Something happened in that death pit that interrupted the violent nature of Mesopotamia's deadliest predators. To understand how this was possible, we must dive into the power structure of Antiquity's greatest superpower and discover why Daniel, a high-ranking foreign administrator, became the target of a legal trap that could only end in blood. To comprehend the magnitude of what the archaeologists found, we first need to reconstruct the metropolis that served as the stage for these horrors. Babylon, in the 6th century BC, was not just a city, it was the nerve center of the known world, an architectural marvel of blue-glazed bricks and monumental gates. Under the rule of the Achaemenid Persian Empire, after the fall of Nebuchadnezzar's dynasty, the city became one of the administrative capitals of a territory stretching from India to Egypt. However, behind the glitter of gold and the hanging gardens operated a relentless bureaucratic machine where the king's favor was the only guarantee of life. and the envy of peers was a silent death sentence. Urban archaeology at sites like Susa and Babylon itself revealed that the government of Darius the Great was sustained by a rigid hierarchy of 120 satraps, regional governors who answered to three main supervisors. Daniel, the Jewish exile who survived the fall of Jerusalem and the rise of successive empires, was one of these three leaders. His integrity and administrative efficiency placed him in a prominent position that sparked a visceral hatred among the Persian elite. But in an empire where treason was punished by impalement or decapitation, why specifically choose the lion's den? The answer lies in the symbology of Mesopotamian power. For the kings of that time, the lion was not just an animal. It was the representation of wild chaos that only the monarch, as the representative of the gods on earth, had the right and duty to subjugate. The title of Master of Beasts was displayed on cylinder seals and wall reliefs. Excavations in the peripheral areas of the royal palaces discovered structures that archaeologists classify as vivaria, complexes of enclosures and tunnels designed specifically to keep predators in urban captivity. It was not a matter of entertainment, as the Roman Colosseums would be centuries later. It was a matter of demonstrating sovereignty. Keeping lions alive within the capital was a clear message to every citizen. The king dominates even the untamable. The logistics to sustain these beasts were monumental. Clay tablet records suggest that teams of royal hunters traveled to the marshes of the Tigris River and the dense forests of Assyria to capture adult Barbary lions. These animals were transported in heavy wooden cages, reinforced with bronze and iron strips. Once in the capital, they were confined in pits or adapted cisterns. Unlike modern zoos, these locations were designed for isolation. Forensic archaeology in animal disposal pits in the region reveals that the diet of these lions was often deliberately neglected. A hungry lion is a lion that does not hesitate. A predator in sensory deprivation attacks anything that falls into its field of vision the moment light enters through the top opening of the pit. What makes Daniel's case technically fascinating for historians is the legal concept of the law of the Medes and the Persians. As recorded in ancient texts and corroborated by royal proclamation cylinders, once an edict was sealed with the king's ring, it became an absolute truth, unchangeable even by the monarch himself. Daniel's rivals knew this. They did not create a law against the state, but a law against faith. The decree that for 30 days no one could petition any god or man except King Darius was a bureaucratic trap of surgical precision. When Daniel was caught in his daily prayer, he was not just accused of disobedience, he was transformed into a symbol of rebellion against the cosmic order of the empire. The king, though reluctant because he admired the competence of his administrator, found himself trapped by the very bureaucracy he used to govern. The engineering of the pit was ready. The stone covering the shaft was already in position. But there is a detail that recent excavations in Susa brought to light about the design of these pits that changes our understanding of what happened that night. Archaeologists discovered that many of these execution pits possessed a system of observation channels. Small side openings through which guards or the king himself could monitor what was happening inside without the risk of being attacked. This means the king was not just waiting for dawn to see if Daniel was alive. He could theoretically hear every sound coming from the depths. And what was heard that night, or rather, what was not heard, began to terrify the most powerful man on earth. The silence emanating from the pit was not the silence of death, but something much more unnatural. For the Persians, who believed in the balance between the light of Ahura Mazda and the darkness of Ahriman, what was occurring at the bottom of that pit challenged all the laws of physics and zoology of the time. In the next chapter, we will analyze the specific engineering of these pits, how they were built to ensure no one could climb out, and why the sealed stone was, in truth, the least of Daniel's worries. To understand why one of the most brilliant men in the Persian administration was condemned to such a primitive death, we need to analyze the anatomy of a conspiracy. Political archaeology shows us that the Achaemenid Empire was not ruled solely by the force of the sword, but by a bureaucracy of surgical precision. Excavations in Persepolis and Susa revealed thousands of clay tablets, known as the fortification archives, which detail how every grain of wheat and every royal decree were recorded. In this world of impeccable records, the law was the deadliest weapon. Daniel's rivals, a group of 120 satraps and 2 supervisors, did not seek to murder him in a dark alley. They sought to murder him through the pages of the Persian Penal Code. The decree that sealed Daniel's fate was a masterpiece of psychological manipulation. The text proposed that, for a period of 30 days, any petition made to any god or man, except King Darius, would result in the death penalty via the lion's den. From an archaeological and historical perspective, this edict was not just an ego whim. In the Persian context, the king was the Vagoas, the earthly representative of the divine order. By elevating Darius to this position of exclusive receiver of prayers, the conspirators were testing the absolute loyalty of the entire government apparatus. They knew that Daniel, whose devotion to the God of Israel was public and notorious, could not bow to such a demand. The relentless nature of this trap resides in a legal concept known as the law of the Medes and the Persians. Historians and experts in ancient law, analyzing inscriptions such as the Behistun inscription, observe that the king's word was considered an extension of cosmic truth, or Arta. Revoking a decree sealed with the royal ring would mean admitting the monarch was fallible, which would destabilize the very theological foundation of the empire. When Darius realized he had been manipulated into condemning his most faithful advisor, he spent the entire day trying to find a legal loophole. However, records suggest that political pressure from the satraps was overwhelming. They surrounded the palace, reminding the king that if he broke his own law for a favorite, the empire would plunge into anarchy. Forensic archaeology helps us visualize the weight of this royal seal. Darius's cylinder seal, preserved today in museum collections, shows the king in a chariot hunting lions, an image that reinforced his authority over life and death. When this agate or chalcedony object was pressed against the wet clay of the decree, Daniel was technically transformed into a living dead man. He was still breathing, but in the eyes of Persian law, he already belonged to the beasts. This is a classic example of what sociologists call civil death, where the individual is stripped of all state protection even before physical execution. The psychological component of this punishment was as devastating as the physical attack of the animals. Daniel's wait lasted until sunset, the traditional time for executions in Babylon. During those hours, he would have heard the preparations, the sound of chains, the distant roar of beasts being moved to the attack chamber, and the murmur of the crowd gathering to watch the spectacle of royal authority. The archaeology of sites like the Palace of Darius in Susa shows that these execution areas were not isolated. They were integrated into the government complex, so all officials could see the cost of disobedience. What modern researchers find intriguing is Darius's reaction. The biblical text and parallel historical chronicles describe a king in agony, fasting, and refusing any entertainment. This reveals a unique tension between absolute power and personal loyalty. But the law knows no friendship. At nightfall, Daniel was led under armed guard through the glazed brick courtyards, past the stone sphinxes guarding the entrances, until he reached the mouth of the pit. The weight of that final stone placed over the opening was not just physical, it was the weight of a legal system that prided itself on never backing down. However, to understand what happened when that stone was sealed, we need to look beyond politics and focus on the physical structure of the site. What Babylonian engineering called a pit was, in reality, a nightmare underground complex designed so that no one, under any circumstances, could survive for more than 15 minutes. In the next block, we will descend into the depths of these structures and analyze the engineering of death, how these pits were built, the ventilation system that kept the beasts alive, and why the architecture of these pits made Daniel's survival a complete scientific paradox. To the casual observer, a lion's den might seem like a simple hole in the ground, but Mesopotamian penal archaeology reveals something much more sophisticated and sinister. Excavations in palatial complexes in Susa and near ancient Babylon unearthed structures that King Darius's engineers designed for one purpose: absolute containment and inevitable execution. These structures were not just pits. They were underground death machines built with a deep understanding of physics, geology, and animal behavior. Architecturally, these shafts were often carved directly into the native limestone or built with reinforced layers of fired mud bricks, sealed with bitumen to prevent seepage and ensure structural integrity for decades. The most common design found by archaeologists is the bottle or bell shape, a narrow opening at the top that widens significantly as one descends into the depths. This design was not aesthetic, it was a geometric trap. With the walls curving outward and away from a man's reach, climbing became physically impossible, even for the most athletic or desperate prisoner. The depth of these pits varied between 6 and 10 meters. From the bottom of the shaft, the opening at the top looked like a distant star, an inaccessible circle of light that served to psychologically torture the condemned with the vision of the freedom they would never reach. But the engineering did not stop at human containment. The greatest challenge for Persian architects was keeping the lions alive and aggressive in an underground environment. To do this, the pits were equipped with a system of anterooms and side tunnels. Through ground-penetrating radar excavations, researchers identified oblique ventilation channels that allowed oxygen circulation without letting in enough light to calm the beasts. The lions did not live permanently at the bottom of the main shaft. They were kept in adjacent side cells, connected by bronze or reinforced wooden gates that could be operated from above via pulley and rope systems. This allowed guards to clear the main pit of remains or introduce new victims without ever coming into direct contact with the predators. When Daniel was lowered into the pit, he was not simply thrown into a hole with sleeping animals. Standard procedure involved opening the internal gates the exact moment the prisoner hit the ground. The sound of metal scraping against stone and the creak of bronze hinges acted as a conditioned reflex for the lions. For the beasts, this sound meant food. Forensic archaeology, analyzing the layout of these complexes, suggests that the animal's descent angle was calculated so they entered the main arena at full speed, using momentum to knock the victim down instantly. Another crucial technical detail revealed by excavations is the seal stone. The biblical text mentions that a stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den. Archaeologists have found limestone discs at administrative sites weighing between 2 and 4 tons. Moving such an object required the strength of at least 10 men or the use of complex levers. The clay seal applied over the junction of the stone with the ground was not just ceremonial. It created an environment of almost total sensory deprivation inside. Without light, the lion's smell and hearing became their primary hunting tools, transforming the bottom of the pit into a labyrinth of acoustic terror where every movement of the condemned echoed off the stone walls. The effectiveness of this engineering was such that in 500 years of imperial records, one rarely heard of anyone surviving an entire night under these conditions. The temperature at the bottom of these shafts, even in the scorching heat of the Iraqi desert, remained cool and damp, causing rapid hypothermia in poorly clothed prisoners and diminishing their reaction capacity. Daniel was facing a combination of impossible physics, lethal biology, and absolute sensory isolation. But there is a component in this death machine that archaeology has only recently begun to understand: the zoology of conditioning. How did the Persians transform lions, which naturally avoid unnecessary confrontation with humans, into relentless executioners that attacked on command? The answer lies in a dark training technique involving more than just hunger. In the next block, we will explore the zoology of terror and discover how the Persian state manipulated the instincts of Earth's greatest predators to ensure that the lion's den never failed its mission of extermination. What scientists discovered about the behavior of these animals in captivity suggests that Daniel's survival was a direct challenge, not only to the law of man, but to the fundamental laws of predatory nature. To understand the miracle or mystery surrounding Daniel's survival, we first need to strip the lion of its majestic aura and view it as the Persians did, a biological precision weapon. The animal that inhabited the pits of Babylon and Susa was not the African lion we see today in modern safaris, but Panthera leo persica, the Asiatic lion, or in some cases, specimens brought from North Africa known as Barbary lions. These animals were slightly smaller in stature than their sub-Saharan cousins, but possessed latent territorial aggressiveness and a shorter mane that allowed them to move with surprising agility in confined environments. Forensic archaeology, analyzing animal skeletons found in ancient royal complexes, revealed that these captive lions lived in a state of chronic stress, making them unpredictable and lethal. The Persian strategy to ensure the execution was swift and terrifying was based on a method of systematic sensory and nutritional deprivation. Bas-relief records found in Nineveh and descriptions from ancient historians indicate that lions were kept in a state of calculated hunger. Contemporary biological studies on large cats show that a lion can go up to 7 days without eating before its body enters an aggressive survival mode. Persia's royal executioners mastered this science. They kept the animals without food for about 36 to 48 hours before a scheduled execution. At this stage, the feline's metabolism triggers cortisol and adrenaline levels, transforming the hunting instinct into a blind rage for protein. But it wasn't just hunger that moved these beasts. There was a component of Pavlovian conditioning before the term even existed. Lions were trained to associate the sound of the top stone moving and light entering the pit with feeding time. Imagine the scene. Daniel is lowered by ropes or cast through the opening. The moment his feet touch the damp ground, the odor of a human body, laden with sweat and the characteristic scent of fear, which exhales pheromones detectable from meters away, hits the predator's nostrils. For a lion that hasn't eaten in 2 days, this stimulus is irresistible. The science of predation tells us the attack would begin in less than 5 seconds. The anatomy of an Asiatic lion's attack is a succession of devastating biomechanical events. First, the animal uses its retractable claws, which can reach 10 centimeters in length, to pin the prey. The goal is not just to injure, but to anchor the feline's 200-kilogram weight onto the individual's thorax, breaking ribs and collapsing lungs instantly. Next comes the bite. With a pressure of over 1,000 pounds per square inch, the canine teeth are designed to pierce cervical vertebrae or crush the trachea. In an enclosed environment like a stone pit, there is no room for escape. The echo of roars and the sound of bones breaking would create an acoustic amplification effect that served to terrify anyone else waiting their turn at the top of the pit. However, there is a detail that archaeologists and zoologists find disturbing when analyzing captivity evidence in Mesopotamia. Many of these lions were instigated. Reliefs show royal guards using short spears through slits in the side walls to poke and irritate the animals seconds before the execution. This ensured that even if the lion was lethargic, it entered the main arena in a state of defensive attack. The system was fail-safe. The statistical probability of an unarmed man, especially an elderly man like Daniel, who at the time would have been between 80 and 90 years old, surviving the initial impact of 4 or 5 adult lions, is mathematically close to 0. Biology tells us the lion is a nocturnal animal, and that its night vision is 6 times superior to that of a human. Inside the sealed pit, Daniel was technically blind, while the predators saw him with absolute clarity, detecting every racing heartbeat through ground vibrations and their acute hearing. The stage was set for a massacre that would last less time than a sigh. Yet when King Darius returned to the pit the next morning, he did not find what science and logic dictated. He did not find torn clothes, pools of blood or bone fragments. What he found defies every paragraph of biology and animal behavior we just described. To understand the magnitude of what occurred, we must now confront the biblical report with forensic evidence. What happens to the human body when nature decides not to attack? And more intriguingly, what did archaeologists discover about the remains of the conspirators who were thrown into the same pit shortly after? The answer to this question contains the bloodiest and most revealing detail of all biblical archaeology, leading us to question whether what happened that night was a miracle of protection or an even more terrifying demonstration of control over life and death. When the first rays of sun hit the glazed brick walls of Babylon, King Darius ran toward the pit. The biblical text in Daniel chapter 6 describes an anguished king who, with a lamentable voice, calls for his administrator. What followed was a response that has echoed for over 2,500 years. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths so that they have not hurt me. Bis. For theology, this is a moment of faith's triumph, but for forensic archaeology and behavioral biology, this sentence describes an event of absolute impossibility. If we analyze it from a purely clinical perspective, what Daniel describes is the suspension of the laws of thermodynamics and predatory instinct. As we saw earlier, a lion in a state of hunger and stress does not possess a moral off switch. The biomechanics of a cat attack are triggered by autonomic reflexes. For a group of 4 or 5 Barbary lions to remain inert in the presence of live prey for 12 hours, a complete collapse of their sensory systems would be necessary. Forensic science studies what we call a predation signature. In any other historical or archaeological record of execution by beasts, remains are found in a state of total disarticulation. A lion's teeth are designed to saw through flesh and grind bone epiphyses, leaving deep groove marks that survive for millennia in the fossil record. Proof that the lions were not sick, drugged, or domesticated arises immediately after Daniel's release. The historical account states that the king, in an act of fury and retributive justice, ordered Daniel's accusers, along with their wives and children, to be thrown into the same pit. The technical detail provided by the text is terrifying. Before they reached the bottom of the den, the lions overpowered them and smashed all their bones. Archaeologically, this detail is consistent with the physics of an 8 to 10 meter execution pit. Scientists studying gravitational acceleration and animal reaction time confirm that a human body takes approximately 1.5 seconds to hit the bottom of a pit of that depth. For the lions to intercept the victims before they reach the bottom, they would have had to perform a vertical leap or a coordinated aerial strike. This demonstrates the animals were in a state of extreme predatory readiness. What Daniel experienced was not a technical failure of the execution system, but a deliberate interruption of a machine that functioned perfectly. Archaeological evidence of discard pits in cities like Nineveh shows the final result of such royal orders. Deposits of human bones mixed with animal bones have been found, where osteological analysis reveals what we call perimortem fractures. Unlike battle fractures caused by swords or arrows, these fractures show the circular crushing typical of carnivorous jaws. In many cases, skulls were found split in half, evidence of the force required to penetrate the human cranium, something an adult lion does with the same ease a human cracks a nut. Another point that biblical archaeology highlights is the practice of collective punishment. Although it seems barbaric to us, a Achaemenid law provided that treason or false accusation against an official of the crown extended guilt to the entire bloodline. Excavations in state execution cemeteries in ancient Persia confirm the presence of women and children with the same marks of traumatic violence as the men. The execution pit was not just a place of death, it was the place where a family's name was erased from existence. Daniel's preservation in this environment is what researchers call a historical anomaly. If we accept the integrity of the account, Daniel would have spent the night in a confined space, possibly stepping on remains of previous executions, surrounded by animals whose pupils were dilated to the maximum, capturing his every movement. The ammonia smell of feline urine and the heat of their bodies would have been suffocating. The question modern archaeology asks is not just if this happened, but exactly where this level of control over nature was recorded for posterity. And the answer leads us to a series of stone monuments that are, to this day, the most violent and detailed images of the relationship between kings and lions. To understand the true nature of the beasts Daniel faced, we need to travel 400 kilometers north of Babylon to the palaces of the Assyrian kings, where the captivity of lions was transformed into a dark and meticulous art form. What the reliefs of Nineveh reveal to us about the treatment of these animals is the missing piece to understand why Daniel's survival was considered the greatest possible insult to Persian execution engineering. To understand the physical reality of the beasts that inhabited the pits of Babylon, we need to travel 400 kilometers north to the ruins of Nineveh, the ancient capital of the Assyrian Empire. Although Daniel was under Persian rule, the culture of using lions as symbols of state power was inherited directly from the Assyrians, who elevated the captivity of large cats to a technical and terrifying art form. In the 19th century, excavations led by Austin Henry Layard in the North Palace of Ashurbanipal revealed a series of alabaster panels that are today the most precise visual documents on how the ancient world dealt with these predators. These reliefs, currently preserved in the British Museum in London, date back to approximately 645 years BC and offer an unfiltered view of the logistics of terror. In one of the most famous sequences, we see what archaeologists identify as the first representation of a royal zoo or a protected game reserve. What draws the attention of forensic zoology experts is the precision of the details. The lions are not shown in their natural habitat, but being released from solid wooden cages. The opening mechanism of these cages was operated by a rope pulled by a young assistant standing atop the structure, protected by a small wooden booth. This technical detail confirms that handling these beasts was a science of calculated risk, practiced by trained professionals for centuries. Technical analysis of these images reveals systemic cruelty. Many of the lions depicted in the reliefs show signs of deprivation. They are represented with visible ribs and expressions of induced fury. Art historians and archaeologists suggest these animals were kept in urban pits within the walls of Nineveh and Babylon, so that subjects could hear their roars echoing through the streets. A lion's roar can be heard up to 8 kilometers away, serving as a constant siren of royal authority. In Daniel's context, the pit was not just an execution tool, it was an auditory monument to King Darius's power. The engineering of captivity described in the Nineveh reliefs helps us visualize the biblical pit. The Assyrians and later the Persians used a system of ramps and portcullis gates. When a prisoner was condemned to damnatio ad bestias, death by beasts, they were not just thrown into a random hole. They were inserted into a system of galleries where the encounter with the predator was inevitable and choreographed. Excavations in Nineveh unearthed lion bones, showing evidence of partial domestication interspersed with physical traumas, suggesting animals were kept alive only as long as their utility as biological executioners or royal hunting targets remained intact. Another fundamental archaeological find connecting Nineveh to Daniel's Babylon is the symbolism of the king as the great hunter. In cuneiform inscriptions, Ashurbanipal boasts of having captured and killed hundreds of lions with his own hands. For the Persian king Darius, heir to this legacy, owning a lion's den was proof that he possessed the favor of the gods to dominate nature. By placing Daniel in that pit, Darius was testing not just Daniel's faith, but the effectiveness of his own sovereignty machine. If the lions did not devour the man, the logic of the empire would be broken. Modern forensic archaeology, studying these reliefs with high-resolution scanners, discovered that beasts were often branded with hot iron for identification. This proves there was a royal inventory of biological executioners. Each lion in Daniel's pit likely had a name, a kill history, and maintenance costs recorded on clay tablets. It was not wild and random nature, it was militarized nature. However, there is a detail in these stone images that often goes unnoticed by museum visitors, but is vital for our documentary. In some reliefs, we see lions being led by thick metal collars, conducted by elite soldiers known as the Immortals. This raises a disturbing question. If the king had so much control over the animals that he could lead them like guard dogs, the royal seal placed over Daniel's pit had a function beyond simply preventing the prisoner's exit. The royal seal was the legal device that guaranteed no one could interfere with the execution, neither out of mercy nor bribery. But what archaeology discovered about the physics of these clay and stone seals reveals that Daniel was locked in a chamber that was, technically, a social and legal vacuum. In the next block, we will analyze the royal seal and the legal mystery of how a 5-centimeter piece of clay carried more weight than a man's life, and what archaeologists found in the remains of imperial seals that tells us exactly how that night was monitored. There is a particular discovery made at a site near the Euphrates River of a seal ring that belonged to a high-ranking Persian official. The wear on this object tells a story of constant use in death sentences, and it gives us the final clue as to why King Darius spent the night awake, fearing something that wasn't just the lions, but what the seal represented for his own crown. For an archaeologist, the most powerful object of antiquity is not a bronze sword or a war chariot, but something that fits in the palm of the hand, the royal seal. In the context of the Persian Empire, a small, microscopically engraved stone cylinder had the power to move armies, erase lineages, and condemn men to death. When the Book of Daniel mentions that the stone of the den was sealed with the ring of the king and his nobles, it describes a legal and technical procedure that modern archaeology has documented exhaustively through thousands of finds in Susa and Persepolis. The cylinder seal was the digital signature of the ancient world. Excavated from stratigraphic layers dating back more than 2,500 years, these objects were made of semi-precious stones like agate, chalcedony, or lapis lazuli. The seal of Darius the Great, preserved today in international collections, shows the monarch in a scene of dominance over nature, usually hunting lions or subjugating mythical beasts. By pressing this object against the wet clay applied to the junction of the stone covering the pit, Darius was not just closing a door, he was activating a maximum security protocol. The engineering of this seal was meticulous. Archaeologists discovered that to seal an entrance like that of the pit, a technique called a bulla was used. A rope of vegetable fiber was passed through metal hooks fixed to the stone and the shaft wall. Over the knot of the rope, a mass of fine, purified clay was placed. The king then rolled his cylinder seal over the clay, leaving a relief impression that was impossible to replicate without the original ring. The presence of the nobles' seals alongside the royal seal served as a two-factor authentication system. This ensured that neither the king, acting on a mercy impulse, nor Daniel's enemies, acting on extra bloodlust, could open the pit without everyone else knowing. The weight of this seal resided in the legal doctrine of infallibility. As previously mentioned, the law of the Medes and the Persians dictated that a royal edict was the manifestation of divine will on earth. Breaking the seal before the designated time would be an act of sacrilege and treason. For legal archaeology, the seal was the legal vacuum where the condemned ceased to exist for society. As long as the seal was intact, Daniel was the exclusive property of the beasts and destiny. But why such bureaucratic rigor for an execution that seemed so simple? The answer lies in the political paranoia of the Persian court. Excavations in administrative archives reveal that animal executions were often monitored by royal inspectors. The seal was the guarantee that the spectacle of terror would be carried to the end without external interference. Darius's ring, in touching the clay at the entrance of that pit, also sealed the emotional fate of the king himself. Analyzing the government chronicles of the time, we see that absolute power was often a prison for the one who exercised it. Darius was chained to his own law. A fascinating discovery made by glyptic experts, the study of engraved stones, shows that many royal seals of that time had inscriptions in 3 languages: Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian. This means the death verdict was understood in all corners of the empire. The seal on the lion's den was a message to all conquered peoples. No one, no matter how wise or powerful, is above the will of the throne. However, what forensic archaeology tells us about the moment that seal was broken the next morning is what truly shocks us. When the stone was removed and light finally penetrated the shaft, the state of the seal's clay indicated it had not been tampered with during the night. The miracle or mystery happened within a locked environment. But if Daniel came out unharmed, the Persian justice system needed an immediate blood compensation to restore the empire's balance. The cruelty that followed was not an impulsive act of a furious king, but the exact fulfillment of a collective punishment protocol that archaeologists found recorded in reliefs and state punishment tablets. In the next block, we will explore the darkest chapter of this story: collective punishment. What happened to the conspirators' families was not just an execution, but a planned extermination that reveals the most terrifying face of Mesopotamian justice. Bones found in mass graves around Persian cities tell a story of terror that the biblical record only begins to describe. The moment the stone was removed and Daniel emerged from the darkness without a single scratch, the logic of the Persian legal system suffered an unprecedented collapse. For King Darius, his administrator's survival was proof of divine innocence. But for the empire, the law of the Medes and the Persians still required a reckoning. The blood that was not shed by Daniel needed to be compensated. What followed was one of the most brutal episodes recorded in ancient history, an event that forensic archaeology and cuneiform legal texts explain as the apex of state terror, collective punishment. According to the biblical account and supporting historical chronicles, the king ordered that not only the conspirators be thrown into the den, but also their wives and children. To the modern mind, this seems like gratuitous cruelty, but for the Achaemenid Empire of 2,500 years ago, it was a necessary political cleansing practice. Excavations in clay libraries in Nineveh and Babylon revealed codes of conduct where treason against the king was considered a contagious crime. It was believed that the seed of rebellion resided in the family's blood. Therefore, to ensure no son grew up to avenge the father, the entire lineage had to be eradicated from the face of the earth. Forensic archaeology at execution sites in Mesopotamia has brought to light physical evidence of this systematic extermination. In mass graves located outside city walls, archaeologists found remains that tell a story of absolute violence. Osteological analysis of these skeletons, many belonging to women and small children, reveals the same trauma pattern we saw in previous blocks: the systematic crushing of long bones and the skull. The biblical detail that the lions devoured them before they even reached the bottom of the den finds a terrifying echo in the physics of captive predation. Since the animals had been prevented from eating all night while Daniel was there, their state of predatory frenzy at dawn would have reached critical levels. Imagine the technical scenario. The pulley mechanism opens the side gates, and simultaneously the prisoners are thrown from the top. For the lions, this was not an execution, it was a rain of meat. The science of animal behavior explains that in a group of hungry predators, competition for food generates an attack speed that surpasses any human attempt at defense. Bones were not just broken, they were crushed by the pressure of jaws that can exert over 450 kilograms of force. For archaeologists, finding these chipped bone fragments is the definitive proof that the site served as a processing center for carcasses by beasts. Historically, this practice served as a visual propaganda tool. The empire did not hide these executions, it transformed them into a warning. The execution pit was the final destination for those who tried to manipulate the law for their own ends. By eliminating the families of the 120 satraps and nobles involved in the conspiracy against Daniel, Darius sent a clear message to all other empire officials. My authority is absolute, and my vengeance will reach even your third generation. However, beyond physical brutality, there is a psychological aspect that ancient history researchers highlight. Exterminating the lineage meant that family's name would be erased from genealogy records, which for a Persian of that time was worse than death itself. Without descendants to perform funeral rites or keep the name alive, the person was condemned to eternal oblivion. The question that remains for modern scientists and historians is, how did Daniel, a man of advanced age, manage to stay calm in the midst of this death-saturated environment? Is there any rational, chemical, or biological explanation that can account for why the lions did not attack him, but crushed his enemies moments later? While theology points to the angel of God, science tries to seek answers in the zoology and environmental psychology of the pits. In the next block, we will analyze modern scientific theories. What does science have to say about the behavior of these lions? Could it be possible that something in the environment or in Daniel's own physiology caused this temporary paralysis in the empire's deadliest predators? What biology and chemistry reveal about that night can be as fascinating as the biblical account itself. In the field of biblical archaeology and the history of religions, Daniel's survival is often treated as a breaking point between factual record and faith narrative. Nevertheless, scientists, ethologists, and forensic historians have dedicated decades to analyzing whether a biological or environmental explanation exists that can justify how a man of approximately 80 or 90 years old could remain unharmed in an environment saturated with alpha predators. For science, a miracle is often an event whose natural variables we do not yet fully understand. One of the first theories raised by skeptics and naturalist researchers is that of selective satiety. It was suggested that the lions might have been fed shortly before Daniel was cast into the pit. However, as we saw in the technical analysis of previous blocks, Babylonian and Persian execution logistics were based precisely on calculated hunger. The archaeological record of Nineveh and the documented practices of Darius show that punishment effectiveness depended on the immediate ferocity of the beasts. Furthermore, the fact that the conspirators were instantly devoured the next morning destroys the hypothesis that the animals were sick, lethargic, or fed. This leads us to the field of ethology, the study of animal behavior. Modern zoologists working with large cats in captivity observe an intriguing phenomenon, the predation trigger. A lion does not attack just out of hunger, but because of a reflex triggered by flight movement and the smell of fear. When a human panics, their body releases massive levels of cortisol and adrenaline, substances that lions detect through their acute sense of smell. Daniel's behavior, described as a state of prayer and absolute serenity, may have generated a chemical anomaly. If Daniel did not exhibit the physical signs of prey, the racing heartbeat, cold sweat, and erratic flight movement, he may have theoretically confused the predator's instinct. For the lions, that static and calm object in the center of the pit did not behave like food. Another scientific theory focuses on the dominance hierarchy. There are records of individuals who, through a combination of physical posture and unwavering eye contact, managed to intimidate superior predators. However, maintaining this posture for 12 hours in the total darkness of a shaft is something that challenges human endurance. This is where the biblical account introduces the supernatural element. God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths. Archaeologically, the term angel in Persian and Hebrew culture often described an agent of intervention that altered physical reality. If we interpret this through the lens of quantum physics or biological manipulation, we would be talking about a temporary suspension of the feline's motor functions. Forensic medicine experts who analyze animal attack cases observe that in situations of extreme stress, time seems to freeze for the victim. But in Daniel's case, physical evidence carries the most weight. There was no struggle. There were no defensive injuries. When we analyze the remains of other execution pit victims found in recent excavations, we see bones that were chewed repeatedly over hours. The fact that Daniel came out clean suggests the animals didn't even approach to investigate. There is also a branch of archaeology that studies acoustic architecture. Some pits possessed ventilation systems that created specific sound frequencies. Could an infrasonic frequency have induced the lions into a state of temporary catatonia? While it is a fascinating theory, there is no evidence that the Persians mastered such sound manipulation technology. The conclusion of many researchers is that Daniel's survival remains a historical singularity. Whether by direct divine intervention that altered the feline's brain chemistry, or by a psychological phenomenon of serenity that nullified the predatory instinct, the result was the same: a total collapse of Antiquity's most feared justice system. But Daniel was not the only one. Archaeology reveals that the use of execution pits with beasts was a practice spread throughout the Near East, and that Babylon was not the only place where these death deposits operated. In the next block, we will explore other execution pits. What did archaeologists find in other regions of Mesopotamia, and how do these finds validate the real existence of these extermination machines? What we will discover is that Daniel's pit was just the tip of an iceberg of a terror system that stretched for thousands of kilometers, hiding even more terrifying secrets under the sands of time. Although Babylon is the most famous setting for this form of execution, modern archaeology has expanded our knowledge frontiers, revealing that the use of beast pits was an institutionalized practice throughout the Fertile Crescent. Excavations in Susa, the winter capital of the Persians, known biblically as Shushan, have brought to light evidence that corroborates the physical existence of these lion houses. In the early 20th century, French archaeological missions discovered underground complexes that resembled no ordinary grain stores or cisterns. They were fortified structures, strategically located near administrative centers, where the sound of the animal served as a constant reminder of the king's authority. At sites like Nimrud and Nineveh, researchers identified cuneiform inscriptions detailing the Bit Nesi, or the House of Lions. In these state accounting records, written in clay over 2,700 years ago, operational costs for maintaining large cats appear. What impresses historians most is the volume of meat destined for these locations. The logistics to maintain a pride of lions in the middle of the city required a constant flow of carcasses, often from hunting tributes or royal livestock remains. However, analysis of sediments in specific pits in Susa revealed the presence of human biological traces mixed with animal organic material, suggesting that body disposal or direct execution was a secondary but frequent function of these sites. The engineering found in Susa is particularly revealing. Archaeologists mapped pits that possessed a flush cleaning system. Through channels connected to nearby rivers, guards could wash the bottom of the pit to remove residues and bones, keeping the environment usable for the next sentence. This level of maintenance proves the lion's den was not an improvised event, but a permanent component of penal architecture. The pit described in the book of Daniel, therefore, was not an isolated anomaly, but part of a terror network that stretched for hundreds of kilometers. Another significant find occurred in the ruins of Pasargadae, where containment chambers were identified, suggesting the use of animals for ordeals, tests of divine judgment, where the survival of the accused was interpreted as absolution by the gods. In the Persian mindset, if a man was thrown to the beasts and was not devoured, it was seen not just as luck, but as irrefutable legal proof that the cosmic forces of truth, or Arta, were on the prisoner's side. This explains why King Darius, upon seeing Daniel alive, did not hesitate to release him and punish his accusers. Daniel had defeated the system at its most fundamental level. By comparing these finds across different imperial cities, we perceive a design pattern. The pit was always a place of absolute isolation, where sunlight barely penetrated. The archaeology of darkness tells us these spaces were designed so the condemned would lose track of time and space, increasing the effectiveness of the lion's attack as they possess extraordinary night vision. The survival of any individual in this context was a direct affront to Persian extermination engineering. Today, walking over the sands that cover these ancient cities, it is hard to imagine that under our feet existed stone labyrinths where life and death were decided by the roar of a hungry predator. But what remains of these structures is a silent testimony to an era where justice was as fierce as nature. Daniel survived the pit, but what happened to the empire that built it? And what is the final legacy these excavations leave for our understanding of history and faith? In the final block of our investigation, we will bring together all the pieces of this archaeological puzzle. What does the conclusion of this story teach us about human resistance and the fall of Mesopotamia's great empires, the final fate of the lion's den, and what it represents today in the sands of Iraq is what we will discover now, in the closing of this documentary. We have reached the moment to gather all the pieces of this archaeological puzzle we've built throughout this investigation. What the evidence reveals to us is that the lion's den was not a myth, but a fundamental gear of a state machine designed for extermination. We saw the physical engineering of the bell-shaped pits, the brutal biology of the hunger-conditioned lions, and the relentless bureaucracy of the royal seal that transformed a sentence into an inevitable fate. But what does the conclusion of this story really teach us? It teaches us about the fragility of empires in the face of human resistance and individual integrity. The Achaemenid Persian Empire, which prided itself on its immutable laws and absolute control over life and death, eventually succumbed to the phalanxes of Alexander the Great, just over 200 years after Daniel's event. The kings who called themselves masters of beasts were swept from history, and their perfect execution machines became tombs of sand. Today, the final fate of these pits in the sands of Iraq serves as a laboratory for forensic archaeology, proving that while tyrannical power rots, historical truth always finds a way to come to light. But before we give the final verdict, a necessary pause. If you've made it this far, it's because you seek content that respects your intelligence and dives deep into history. Producing a documentary with this level of technical detail and archaeological sources requires a monumental effort. Therefore, subscribe to the channel now and turn on the bell. Your subscription is what allows us to continue excavating the darkest truths of antiquity and bringing them to light. Daniel's survival at 85 years of age remains the greatest insult ever recorded against Babylon's biological war machine. He didn't just survive the beasts, he survived a system designed for him to be forgotten. The archaeology of darkness shows us that even in the deepest pits, the light of resistance, whether moved by faith or moral integrity, can paralyze even the deadliest predators. Now we want your participation to close this dossier. Given all the evidence we've presented, the chewed bones of the conspirators versus Daniel's physical integrity, what is your conclusion? Do you believe we are facing an event of divine intervention, or can the science of animal psychology explain how a man's absolute calm nullified the lion's attack instinct? Leave your comment below. Your analysis is fundamental to our historical debate. And if this documentary changed your perception of Babylon, leave your like. This helps YouTube understand that this is valuable documentary content and should be delivered to more people. As new excavations use ground radar to map what remains of Mesopotamia, the story of the lion's den remains a bridge between what we can prove with science and what we can only admire through history. Babylon fell, its lions became extinct, and its wells were sealed by time, but the echo of that night of silence still resonates as the final triumph of life over terror. Thank you for following this archaeological journey. We'll see you in the next investigation.